Well, good evening, folks, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We know it's still a little different than it has been in the past, but it's pretty hard to imagine ourselves cramming all into the Snug Cafe in these days. So we're very grateful that you're able to join us virtually and we're able to keep this.
Good evening, folks, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We know it's still a little different than it has been.
That's the most horrifying thing when I forget to mute my own live stream window and you get that 15-second delay. Sorry about that, everyone. You'd think after 2 years of pandemic, I would have gotten the hang of properly hosting these virtual theater events, but I guess I'm just wishing it could be over, but we're not quite there yet. Anyway, thanks so much for being here. We are very lucky to have Martin Clark back to do his beloved annual reading of A Child's Christmas in Wales, the part memoir, part child story about just Christmas through a child's eyes. So I hope you'll be transported, as I always am, in Martin's brilliant reading. And I hope that you'll also take some time this season to make a donation to the Bowen Island Food Bank in lieu of a paid ticket for this evening's event. So without further ado, here is Martin Clark.
One Christmas was so much like another in those years around the Seatown corner, now and out of all sound, except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases rolled down towards the two-tongued sea, like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the rim-edged fish-freezing waves. And I plunge my hands in the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero and the fireman. It was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December in my memory is as white as Lapland, though there were no reindeer. But there were cats, patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks. We waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horribly whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slink and sidle over the white-backed garden walls. And the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasin trappers from Hudson Bay, off the Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden, or if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voices grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms towards the house. And smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room. And the gong was bumbulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin, like a town crier at Pompeii. Oh, this was better than all the cats in Wales, standing on a wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. And something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room, saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper. Call the fire brigade, cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the gong. They won't be there, said Mr. Prothero. It's Christmas. There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. Do something, he said. And we threw our snowballs into the smoke. Now, I think we missed Mr. Prothero and ran out of the house to the telephone box. Let's call the police as well, Jim said. And the ambulance. And Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires. But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out only just in time before they turned it on. Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the fireman turned off the hose and was standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing, always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Oh, would you like anything to read?" Years and years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales and birds the colour of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in damp front farmhouse parlours, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons the English and the bears, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse. Then when we rode the daft and happy hills barebacked, it snowed and snowed. But here a small boy says, "It snowed last year too. I made a snowman and my brother knocked it down and I knocked my brother down. And then we had our tea." But that was not the same snow, I said. Our snow was not only shaken from whitewashed buckets down the sky, it came shoreling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight from the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfather moss, minutely white-ivied the walls, and settled on the postman, opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards. Get back to the postman. Were there postmen then too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses, on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mattened on them manfully. But all the children could hear was the ringing of bells. You mean that the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doors rang? I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside them. Well, I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells. Well, there were church bells too. Inside them? No. In the black, white snow belfries, tugged by bishops and storks. And they rang their tidings over the bandaged town. And they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powdered and ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed with joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. And they were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and snow. They knocked on the doors with their blue knuckles. "Ours has got a black knocker." And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breaths and jogging from one foot to the other like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents, after the Christmas box. and the cold postman with a rose on his button nose tingled down the tea tray slithering run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his icebound boots like a man on a fishmonger's slab. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and by God, he was gone. Get back to the presents. Well, there were the useful presents. Engulfing mufflers of the old coach days and mittens made for great giant sloths. Zebra scarves of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-of-war down to the galoshes. Blinding tam o' shanties like patchwork tea cozies and bunny-suited busbies and balaclavas for victims of head-shrinking tribes. From aunts who always wore wool next to the skin, there were moustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all. And once I had a little crochet nose bag from an aunt now, alas, no longer whinnying with us. And pictureless books in small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles's pond and did, and drowned. And books that told me everything about the wasp except why? Go on to the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-coloured jelly babies and a folded flag and a false nose and a tram conductor's cap and a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell, never a catapult. Once by mistake, though, that no one could explain, a little hatchet and a cellulite duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing mew that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow, and a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, the sea, the animals, any colour I pleased. And still the dazzling sky blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard boils, toffee, fudge, and all sorts, crunches, cracknels, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan, and butter Welsh for the Welsh. And troops of bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run, and snakes and families, and happy ladders, and easy hobbies for little engineers, complete with instructions. Easy for Leonardo. And a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick, to shake our pictures off the wall. And a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth and you stood at the corner of the street and you waited for hours in vain for an old lady to scold you for smoking a cigarette. And then with a smirk, you ate it. And then it was breakfast under the balloons. Were there uncles there, like in our house? There are always uncles at Christmas, the same uncles. And on Christmas morning, with dog-disturbing whistles and sugar fags, I would scour the Swatch town for the news of the little world and find always a dead bird by the white post office or by the deserted swings, perhaps a robin, all but one of its fires out. Men and women wading or scooping back from chapel with taproom noses and wind-buzzed cheeks, all albinos huddled their stiff, black, jarring feathers against the irreligious snow. Mistletoe hung from the gas brackets in all the front parlours. There was sherry and walnuts and bottled beer and crackers by the dessert spoons. And cats in their furabouts watched the fires. And the high-heaped fire spat, all ready for the chestnuts and the mullein polka. Some few large men sat in the front parlours without their collars, uncles almost certainly, trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, returning them to their mouths, coughing, and then holding them out again, as though waiting for the explosion. And some few small aunts not wanted in the kitchen, nor anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edge of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break, like faded cups and saucers. Not many of these mornings trod the piling streets, an old man, always fawn-bowlered, yellow-gloved, and at this time of year, spats of snow, would take his constitutional to the white bowling green as he would take it wet or dry on Christmas Day or Doomsday. Sometimes two hale young men with big pipes blazing, no overcoats, wind-blown scarves, would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes, who knows, to walk into the waves until nothing of them was left but the two curling smoke clouds of their inextinguishable briars. And then I would go be slapdashing home. The gravy smell of the dinners of others, the bird smell, the brandy, the pudding, the mince coiling up into my nostrils, when out of a snow-clogged side lane would come a boy, the spit of myself, with a pink-tipped cigarette and the violent cast of a black eye, cocky as a bullfinch, leering all to himself. I hated him on sight, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violent wink, put his whistle to his lips and blew so stridently, so high, so exquisitely loud, that gobbling faces, their cheeks bulged with goose, would press against their tinselled windows the whole length of the white, echoing street. And for dinner, we had turkey and blazing pudding, and after dinner, the uncle sat in the front of the fire, loosened all buttons, put their large, moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little, and slept. Mothers, aunts, and sisters scurried to and fro, bearing tureens. Aunt Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick. Aunt Dossie had to have 3 aspirins, but Aunt Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snow-born backyard singing like a big-bosomed thrush. And I blow up balloons to see how big they would blow up. And then, when they burst, which they always did, the uncles jumped and rumbled. And in the rich and heavy afternoons, the uncles breathing like dolphins and the snow descending, I would sit among festoons and Chinese lanterns and nibble dates and try to make a model man of war following the instructions for little engineers and produce what might be mistaken for a sea-going tram car. Or I'd go out, my bright new boots squeaking like the white world, onto the seaward hill to call on Jim and Daniel and Jack and to pad through the still streets, leaving huge, deep footprints in the hidden pavements. I bet people will think there's been hippos. Well, what would you do if you saw a hippo coming down our street? I'd go like this, bang. I'd throw him over the railings and roll him down the hill, and then I'd tickle him under the ear and he'd wag his tail. But what would you do if you saw 2 hippos? Iron flanked and bellowing, hippos clanked and battered through the scudding snow towards us as we passed Mr. Daniel's house. Let's post Mr. Daniel a snowball through his letterbox. Let's write things in the snow. Let's write Mr. Daniel looks like a spaniel all over his lawn. Or we walked on the white shore. Can the fishes see it snowing? And the silent, wine-clouded heavens drifted on to the sea. Now we were snow-blind travelers, lost on the North Hills, and the vast dewlap dogs, with flasks around their necks, ambled and shambled up to us, saying Excelsior. and we returned home through the poor streets, where only a few children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow and catcalled after us, their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dock birds and the hooting of ships out in the whirling bay. And then at tea, the recovered uncles would be jolly, and the ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marbled grave. And Aunt Hannah laced her tea with rum because it was only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now that we told by the fire, as the gaslight bubbled like a diver. Ghosts wooed like owls in the long nights when I dared not look over my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cubbyhole under the stairs, and the gas meter ticked. And I remember that we went carol singing once, when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. And at the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house. And we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. And we reached the black bulk of the house. What shall we give them then? Hark the herald? No, Jack said. Good King Wenceslas, I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3. And we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felt darkness around the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Steve. And then a dry, small voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle, guzzling gas, and everywhere was good again and shone above the town. Perhaps it was a ghost, Jim said. Perhaps it was trolls, Dan said, who was always reading. Well, let's go and see if there's any jelly left, Jack said, and we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's Drum. It was all very warm in the little house. Aunt Hannah, who had got onto the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest, and then everybody laughed again. And then I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill. And I heard the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept.
Thank you so much, Martin. I was so lost in it, as I always am. It was just as magical as ever. And hopefully this time next year, we'll be able to do it live in person again to get that extra hit of holiday magic. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I see that there are quite a few people joining in to watch this live stream. And I hope you believe me when I say we can really feel you here with us. It means everything to have you tuning in and watching this live. And also to all of you who are gonna watch the recorded version later on. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining in this holiday magic. Be safe out there, be good to each other, support the Bowen Island Food Bank, and have a wonderful holiday season.
A Merry Christmas to you.